So ladies and gentlemen, we are actually a little more than halfway through our show. And in planning tonight's gala, we wanted to showcase some of the young talent that make Ottawa such an exciting place to do business. And I see so many of you out here in the crowd tonight. But we have arranged for one of the city's young business stars to deliver a brief keynote presentation tonight. In 2008, this young entrepreneur co-founded a software company with two main products: online survey software and online competition software. In just a few years, the company gained more than 100,000 customers, including Disney, Coca-Cola, BMW, and Amnesty International. And in 2014, Fluid was purchased for millions of dollars by web survey giant SurveyMonkey. He is the recipient of this prestigious 40 Under 40 award that a lot of you, I'm sure, in this room have had the privilege of being at and have grown your businesses from there. He also remains an active and important player in Ottawa's tech ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aydin Mirzaee to the stage.
Good evening. So Mark and Mike told me earlier today that there's about 620 people here tonight. And to be very honest with you, that sounded like less than 150, 200 tops. So let's try that one more time. Good evening. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know that feeling when you're sitting on a plane and the person right next to you asks, "What do you do?" I had that experience just a few weeks ago when I met a gentleman named Tom. It wasn't so much that question that was difficult for me to answer. I just turned to him and said, "I'm in the survey business." It was then that he asked me, "Well, how did you get into that?" that I really started to think. The year was 2006. And we had just started our first company called BOBS Systems. BOBS was supposed to be a way that you can make cheap phone calls, long-distance phone calls, on your cell phone. So it was kind of like a Skype, but on your cell phone before Skype was on the cell phone and before there were even apps on cell phones. And when we built this thing, we thought that we were first to market, until we started to look around and read in the press out of nowhere that all these companies from all over the world started to raise millions upon millions of dollars. We didn't even know what venture capital was at the time, but we quickly decided that we should probably raise some. So we met with some advisors right here in Ottawa, and what they all told us to do unanimously was to obviously raise venture capital, but try to do that from VCs in Silicon Valley. Now, we didn't know any VCs, period, let alone VCs in Silicon Valley. But not wanting to give up, what we decided to do was have me pitch our business idea, record it, put it on YouTube, and then email it to every venture capitalist whose email address that we could guess. And of course, if you know someone's first name and last name and you know the company that they work for, the rest is formulaic. So I did this over a 24-hour period, nonstop, from a Friday night until a Saturday morning. And the response was overwhelming. I got responses back from all the top-tier VCs in the Valley. You name it, Sequoia, Menlo Park Ventures, everybody. Everybody responded. And it wasn't necessarily because they thought what we were pitching was such a great idea. It was because that they thought this concept of taking your video pitch and putting that on YouTube was so fascinating, and they had never seen anything like that before. So this was fascinating to me, and the blogosphere somehow got a hold of this, and they went nuts. Everybody was writing about this episode. There's this famous Silicon Valley blog called Valleywag, and Valleywag wrote about this, and they went so far as to coin me as being Lonely Dork 15, after the famous YouTube character at the time, Lonely Girl 15. So needless to say, working at Nortel still at the time, at age 21, I was pretty nervous. I thought that any second someone is going to find out and I'm going to get fired. So in a moment of panic, what I decided to do was to pull the video. And you won't believe what happened next. The blogosphere spurred up an even more speculation. Why had I pulled the video? So it did work at the end, though. We did have several investors fly all the way to Ottawa to meet with us. And we had some interesting discussions, and we progressed this project even further. But ultimately, after a few months, we had to shut down that company. That was the end of Chapter 1. Several months later, my business partner and I looked at this whole episode in fascination. It was so remarkable and interesting to us that all these people from all around the world that we did not know, all of them decided to spend so much time criticizing everything that I had done, not only on the blogosphere and on blogs, but also in the hundreds of comments that pursued for each one of those posts. And we looked at this whole thing, and what we concluded was that people really like to criticize. And being entrepreneurs, the next question for us was, is there a way that we can monetize criticism? And that's how we started the next company, called Chide.it. With the same crew from Box Systems, my co-founders Aydin Mirzaee, Samuel Cormier-Ejima, and Eli Fati. Chide.it was supposed to be the world's first anti-social network. It was supposed to be a social network on criticism. And the idea was that you could post up things onto this network, videos, thoughts, ideas, and the world could come back and criticize what you had posted, hopefully constructively. But needless to say, really, who would put their ideas up for the public to criticize? But at the time, I swear, it seemed brilliant. And needless to say, that company had to close down as well, and that was the end of Chapter 2. So at this point, we were getting pretty desperate, and so we looked at everything that we'd done, and we had this theory that maybe, just maybe, the problem was with the word criticism. And so what if we just took that out, and instead of criticism, we called it feedback? Would people buy feedback? And so we decided that what we had going forward would be called a feedback platform. So we went around town meeting with anyone, really, who would give us a chance. And we met this gentleman named Luc Lalonde. And Luc, at the time, was running this business plan competition. And when we pitched him on this idea of the feedback platform, he said, well, that's interesting. I have this business plan competition, and students submit their business plans, and then we have judges who then provide feedback. Is that what you guys do? I then looked at Ellie, who was standing right next to me. We looked at Luc. We looked at each other one more time, and then we started nodding and saying, yes, that's exactly what we do. But of course, we had nothing remotely close to what Luc was asking for. Fortunately for us, even though Luc's a smart guy and he knew exactly what was going on, but fortunately for us, he decided to just give us our first contract and our first source of revenue, and that was the origin of our first product called Fluid Review. And unfortunately for us, we had made yet another mistake at that point. We spent all the money that Luc had given us to build this product that was very hard-coded and specific to Luc's use case, which meant that we couldn't really configure it to work for anything else. And so, again, we ended up in a place where we did not have a product to sell. And that was the end of Chapter 3. So at this point, we're running on fumes. And in a moment of panic, desperation, fear, whatever you'd like to call it, we looked at what we had built, and we looked at it carefully. And the only portion of the software that was remotely configurable was this front-end portion. Because obviously, if you're applying for any competition, you're always filling out a form. And so the only part of the software that we had actually made in a configurable way was this form component. So we thought, what if we just, carve out that form component, make it its own product, call it Fluid Surveys, and just temporarily try to sell this thing just so that we can make enough money to survive so that we can then go back and build our original product, Fluid Review. This survey thing was supposed to be temporary. So I turned to Tom, who was still sitting right next to me, and I said, it's kind of a long story. We tried a bunch of different projects, and this Fluid Surveys thing, it really took off. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 7 years, we grew Fluidware, which was the name of the company that we had rebranded to over 90 people and staff, and to customers in over 130 countries. And in August 2014, we announced in the Wall Street Journal that we had agreed to be acquired by the world's largest survey company, SurveyMonkey. Ladies and gentlemen, we went from being a telephony company to being a temporary star on YouTube to being a tool to run business plan competitions to being a social network on criticism, all before we became a survey company. But as you've probably already guessed, this wasn't a story of the business that we got into. This was a story of how we never gave up. You just can't beat the person that never gives up. Babe Ruth said that in 1940, and it reigns true till today. So the next time that times are rough, the next time that seemingly strange forces push you in a different direction, the next time that you think that this time it's really over, remember, you just can't beat the person that never gives up. Thank you.